Welcome to Speak the Truth in Love with Clint Day from St. Simon's Island, Georgia on WCGA 1100 AM, where we do speak the truth in love based on Ephesians 4:15. In today's woke PC culture, there are many forces that want to stop free speech, especially for people of faith. Good men and women must be willing to stand up for their faith and be the salt and light to preserve our freedom. True freedom comes from faith in Jesus Christ. In John 8:32, God's word says, "The truth will set you free." Today, I'd like to welcome you, friends. I'd like to welcome a good friend, Kristina Twitty. It's great to have you, Kristina.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So tell us what you're doing. I mean, I'm very excited about what you're doing. Before I do that, I'm going to let people know a little bit about you.
Okay.
One of the things this young lady did was help me with my U.S. Senate campaign. I was a state senator and felt led to run for U.S. Senate when Sam Nunn retired from Georgia. And 1996, felt led to do that. And so we got involved in that campaign. And she was a very young lady right out of school, I guess, and did a great job working for the campaign, always had a great attitude. And if you've ever been around a campaign, you can know how much pressure it gets and how many deadlines you have and how things always are constantly changing. And she was a steady rock as a young lady and just did an amazing job. She's had an amazing career protecting babies in the womb and has done a really incredible ministry her entire her career. And spent time in Washington. And now she's got a new vision. And let's hear about what it is.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be still connected with you, and more so since having some time in St. Simon's recently. So thank you for this. I guess to start with, this is kind of moving me from the front end of life to the back end of life in a lot of ways, with just the advocacy side of things. And part of it was early exposure to the need, for that kind of advocacy on kind of the vulnerable side of a young person or now an older person. So I launched a nonprofit last summer called Beacon, BEKN, and it's to do exactly what it sounds like, just to offer light and guidance and a celebration of older people by helping to equip the church to expand or launch their own seniors ministry that serves the aging senior and their family caregiver. Because a lot of times the senior programs are very active for active seniors, which is wonderful. But once that senior is no longer able to arrive somewhere on their own or navigate the activities of daily living to get there, then a lot of times there's a gap left. And no one has seemed to really take the bull by the horns and fill that. So that's
Gotcha.
the aim of Beacon.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Does that word have a meaning, a special meaning?
No, not as an acronym or anything.
Yes.
Beacon, just as it's spelled, BEAKACON. So that it's kind of a play on the word, but a standout so that people go, what is it?
Yes.
And then we get to explain.
That's good. Now, when I think about someone that is aging and, that fine line between their ability to take care of themselves or whatever, tell us the process that a lot of people go through. And then, of course, we'll ask more after that. Go ahead. Tell us what somebody's going through. How do we recognize it's kind of time?
Well, when someone starts to have difficulty walking, navigating, driving is usually the first thing people think of because they think, don't take my keys, or if there's a cognition decline. And whether or not someone has actually been diagnosed with dementia, family that's around starts to pick up on things not quite being the same, whether it's repetitive conversation or getting lost coming home, whether it's a walk, a drive, or forgetting things that are just naturally part of everyday life. That starts to happen earlier and earlier. So it might not be that you're aging in years, but it might be that memory decline comes first. So it's kind of a different set of circumstances between those two, whether it's dementia or the aging process of not being able to do the daily things, cook, turning on the stove, forgetting that you've left it on, forgetting to lock the door, walking out of the house without the things that you were normally in routine to do. That's
Very
kind
good.
of what you start to pick up first.
Gotcha. And of course, we all have that sometimes, right? We all do
Yes.
things where like,
Sometimers.
I
Yes.
didn't want to do that. Doesn't matter what age we are. But
Right.
one of the things that I would be interested in too is, we have our RFK right now in the HSS or wherever he is, and he's bringing a lot of thought process to eating more healthy and that type of thing.
Mhm.
What are some things that we can do that maybe can delay that type of process for our brains, the healthy brain, or is there some kind of medications they're doing? I guess the main thing is what are like healthy things we can do from an eating standpoint. You got some ideas?
Sure. Well, what I've been reading lately has a whole lot to do with cutting more refined sugar and dyes and synthetic food, literally, out of um, your diet. That's been a huge thing. There's now a Mayo Clinic has started calling it, type 3 diabetes. So there's some attention being paid to that. There's also a lot of attention being paid to this whole concept of the body keeps the score. So when you experience trauma and it kind of gets buried, then oftentimes you're finding yourself navigating something you don't want to think about. And that makes it more difficult for the things you do want to think about to still stay, in the forefront. So sometimes that I think has more to do with it than we realize. Especially, looking now at some of what happened during COVID, what we learned is that isolation also contributes to a mental decline. So if we learned anything from COVID, hopefully it's put more effort into staying connected and people having a physical presence. I mean, even just reading things like how physical touch impacts an older person
Yes.
because
Yes.
of the just the body's physiological response, and especially when it's a loved one. If it's a rub on a shoulder, if it's a holding of the hand, if it's a hug that lasts more than just a quick,
Mm-hmm.
squeeze and that kind of thing, just has a huge, huge impact.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. And I was recently at the Haggai International board meeting, and they do a lot of third world, if you will, developing country leadership
Yeah.
training.
Mm-hmm.
They're already leaders. They send them back in their own country. And one of the main things they talked about with people on the front lines is loneliness
Yeah.
and the need for that connectivity and not isolate yourself. And our church is really big on that you be involved with a group. Don't just come Sunday morning, run out the door, try to beat the crowd out the door. You try to get involved with a group.
Right.
And again, it's just great advice. And when I think about what you're doing, the need at the church level, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times the church is overwhelmed by all the needs.
Mm-hmm.
But with the aging population, the baby boomers coming along, what do we need to do about it?
A lot, I guess is the short answer. One of the reasons that we started this is because it is easy for a pastor to be overwhelmed, especially if you're in a larger church and you have a congregational care pastor, even if you have a seniors pastor, because active seniors are busy people. And being able to kind of wrap your family around someone who gets more and more isolated is why we started this, because we wanted to provide the gifting of administration to a pastor who may have a different gifting. So instead of having them divert to try to create the systems and the ministry themselves, let's pick some things that are already working, a wheel that's already been created, and let's help this language become more readily accessible, whether it's making plans ahead of time for aging years, whether it's making a family care plan, building your supports around it. It's kind of funny to be on this end of life now looking at this, because it's very much the same language that you hear when someone speaks of foster care, and you hear of families taking on foster children, and you hear about the need to surround them with extra family, extra help, extra awareness of what they're going through. Well, very similar to a caregiver who is now taking care of an aging parent who needs all the same kinds of supports and gets kind of forgotten. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind sometimes once a
Right.
senior reaches that.
Kristina, one of the things that I'd like to know is how are we going to implement this in a church? I mean, do more senior members come to church and hang out and eat together, or how does it work?
Well, where our vision for this is one of two things that we'd like to see implemented the most. The first one that I talk about the most is from Respite for All Foundation, started in Alabama. There are 50 now across the country, 11 different denominations. When I found out about this being in Chattanooga, I have a client that's been attending, and it's a ministry that takes a 4-hour segment of time for those with dementia. Their loved one can bring them to a safe place where they're going to have activities, volunteers, surrounded by people, and things that they have the option of participating in. Because when you have dementia, oftentimes you're told what to do every step of the way, because as your memory declines, you need it. You need that kind of assistance. But the Respite program is housed in a church, equipped to take volunteers from the church. So this is your active senior that's desperately needed for helping and supporting their peers, as well as those with dementia, hopefully also in conjunction with a caregiver support group that can be held at the same time, so that someone can come, know that mom is having a great time for a few hours next door, and you get to sit with people that are like-minded oftentimes, or just experiencing the same thing, navigating solutions and ideas and supports. So that's one of the things that we talk with churches about, helping them implement. And the other thing that we talk with churches about implementing is kind of patterned after the idea of the Conversation Project or 5 Wishes, just to start workshops to have the conversations about what would need to happen or what you'd prefer to happen if you were planning ahead for a prolonged illness or death in your family. And anybody over the age of 18 needs that, because you're not automatically, mom and dad are not automatically getting called anymore once you turn 18. So
yes. Well, how would you encourage that with a parent that might be a little reluctant? I mean, what kind of questions do you need to ask them, or what kind of things do you need to do? My mom gratefully is preparing a lot of things. I mean, she's, you've heard of a lady nesting in her house, right, and making every preparation. She's also preparing to go to heaven. She's prepared.
Yes.
She wants to go. She's ready.
Yes.
But at the same time, she knows she's got a legacy to continue to build and
That's
people
right.
to invest in and love on. And, we're blessed to have her at 91, and she's got a system and she's got a plan. That's for sure. But how about that person that doesn't see their parent preparing for that and almost don't want to have the conversation? How do you have that conversation?
It's tough. It really is tough. Sometimes it's just by a light touch. Sometimes it's multiple starts and stops, and knowing that there is a foundational level of trust is also a really big deal. And that's what becomes more and more difficult with many people whose families are estranged or live clear across the country, or older people who never had children, to even name as their healthcare proxy or their healthcare power of attorney. And so a lot of what the Conversation Project and 5 Wishes does is just lays out a few questions and says, what do you value? Let's start there. What's important to you? What does quality of life mean to you? How do you make decisions now with in mind that you are gifting some plans to your loved ones? Because somebody will deal with it. And there are very different approaches. You can say, well, too bad, I'm gone, your problem now.
That's
Or
right.
you
That's
can
what a lot of people do. I mean, I would say most people do that. I mean, you hear about all the stuff that they left in their house, and people just pull a dumpster up and they don't know what to do with it. And you saved all this stuff in a file or whatever, and it's important to you, but your family's like overwhelmed. They're grieving.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Excuse me.
No, it's very true. It's just thinking through the gift you want to leave behind. It's also thinking of the burden you don't want to leave behind.
Yeah.
If it's cleaning out the garage or the attic or the basement, or it's naming things that you knew were important to your kids, or asking them if they have an attachment to something in your home. But it's also things like, creating trusts and placing valuable items in that, so the government doesn't get most of it. And it gets into the financial, cumbersome things to some, but we have the expertise probably sitting in every pew, or in a pew of every church. And so part of my hope is that as we kind of get these conversations started, that you kind of pull together the people that are already amongst their peers to have more of these conversations, because they're not necessarily bringing, work to church and recruiting from it. But what better place to talk with a trusted person that's like-minded, that sees, you're headed for home truly, but when you leave, do you leave the opposite for your loved one,
Mm-hmm.
when you're
Yes.
gone?
Good point. We're motel guests here today, gone tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So we get back to that permanent home in heaven. That's going to be
Yeah.
awesome. Well, one of the things my mom even said to me recently, she said, "You ought to write your own obituary." And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't want to brag on myself. I mean, come on. She's like, "Well, nobody knows what you've done better than you." And I was like, "Well, I'm glad you're doing that too, Mom. I guess you've written your own obituary. Can we edit it? Or she probably would allow that, but
Probably
she has
not.
been such a planner,
Yeah.
and she always has been. I mean, she's been very good, very effective at taking care of those detail.
Hmm.
Why do you think people are so reluctant to take care of that detail of their mortality?
Well, first of all, death is still an enemy. That's just from the beginning. But I also think there's a fear of talking about something. There's a taboo. It used to be much more taboo than it is now. I think COVID and a younger generation who hasn't been around it all of a sudden got smacked upside the head with it, where the expectation was that you do live a long life and nobody's thinking of getting older, so to speak. And
Mm,
when accidents happen and unexplained, sudden deaths happen, it certainly makes everybody take a second look. But it's an uncomfortable conversation to have, and it's just not fun to think about the raw side of that, or the medical side maybe of that, or what it looked like when your grandmother or your grandfather passed away. And if it's prolonged, a lot of people have really terrible experiences with death of older
sure.
loved ones. And so when they think of planning for it, they're like, yeah, I don't really want to think about what happened then. I certainly don't want to think about that, for myself. But I think the church has a really sweet voice in this too, is that if we are headed toward heaven, living like we are now can help with that conversation. And that's
It's
where I
very,
hope we get to have more of them.
that's very true. And I think about watching my mom
Yeah.
preparing, and she's done things like she cleaned all our closets out the best she could. She
Okay.
put a bunch of stuff everywhere on these tables and just said, "Whatever you want, come grab it." Like I'm looking at a Scottish dog on a pillow that I got from her on my couch over here, right? And it was
Oh.
easy to carry, and I could bring it home, right? I've gotten like magnifying glasses because I really don't want a bunch of things, that are so big. And of course,
Mm.
her furniture is just, it's not my style or whatever. I like it; it's beautiful, but it's at her house, right?
Right.
So she's preparing. I mean, she's getting. We're going to auction off these things. We're going to do these things. We're going to make a plan,
Mm-hmm.
um, what they're going to do. I mean, we've asked questions, but she was told by my dad that your business is your business, their business is their business. And
Mm.
if they tell you that, when I ask, what are you going to do, Mom? She'll just say it's in the will. Just deal with it in the will. And as a matter of fact, as I'm getting ready to be married, I have to do a new will, right? You have to do new things, right?
Yeah.
So you don't even think about those type things. All of a sudden, you got to start planning for your life in a better way,
You do.
especially with your kids, right? And
Yes.
so, and your grandchildren in my case. So it's one of those things again that a lot of people just do not want to admit that they got to prepare for the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And I always am intrigued by the way people will say she died last week or whatever, you know. And you got to realize if they're a believer, they're more alive than they've ever been.
Yes.
I try to encourage people that your family member that's promoted, they promoted to glory, right? I remember going to a Salvation Army funeral years ago, and the flag they put over the casket was promoted to glory, and I always
Mm-hmm.
loved that. And so a lot of times people feel like it's over. That's it. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
people with no hope, I can understand why they'd be that way.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when I think about the fact that God gives us a choice,
Sure.
you choose to receive Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, right? And you go to heaven, you get to live an abundant life here on earth. But if you choose not to accept Christ as your Lord and Savior, it's separation from God, it's hell,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
very sad for eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and people say, well, why would a loving God send somebody to hell? And you're like, well, he doesn't. You make a choice. You choose. He gives you a choice. And how about the guy in Africa that never heard of him? Well, if you're seeking him, God will reveal himself to you.
Yes.
And he will find a way to get to you, whether it's a missionary or some little kid at a store. I mean, who knows how he'll get to us and what the process is. And it's amazing how that's an individual thing. We all go through certain things in life to get us to the point of that decision, right? Do I choose Jesus or not?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I chose Jesus, because I reached a point of brokenness on my knees. I'm tired of this lifestyle. Please get me out of it. March 7th, 1981, he got me out of it. So over 44 years ago. And it's a special thing when you finally surrender everything and say, God, I can't handle this anymore. I need your help. Please turn my life around. And there's no more important decision. I mean, again, clearly things my dad and mom taught me growing up, but as a teenager, I got rebellious. So came back to where I needed to be. So help us understand again the process of how you're going to try to encourage a church to implement this type program. Because again, we have, for example, like the Beloved ministry at our church. Obviously, a young single woman had a desire because of her counseling. She saw a lot of single moms and they had no outlet. They had no place to go. It's called Beloved, and it's just grown exponentially. She gets all volunteers, and they have this ministry to single moms. So they got one night where they can come, and they usually try to have men to help take care of the kids, right? So godly men are there influencing these kids. So they all gather there on a Tuesday night, and all the mothers from around Brunswick and St. Simons in our community have the opportunity to come there. They get a free meal, and they get a few hours of a respite from having to do the day-to-day grind of being a single mom. That's an example.
Yeah, that's a great example. Probably pushing on open doors right now has been really interesting because a lot of the pastors are looking at their congregation and know that there is not quite as much support as they wish there was. Having caregiver support groups, setting things up that are little glimpses of what this looks like. Thankfully, there's one respite model here in Chattanooga that is open to people coming and observing what the room even looks like, so that you can get an idea of what this is. Some of the other things that we're looking at doing is like a little miniature workshop of our own, just hosting it as Beacon so that we can invite pastors and the leadership of churches that we're already in conversation with, so that they can get an idea of the types of things you can talk about, the expertise we can offer, but then also think of who in their pew has already got this kind of expertise and might already be working in estate planning or financial planning or as medical or works at hospice or as a palliative care team, that kind of thing. So it can kind of mix through as people start to realize, oh, these resources are actually in our family already.
Yes, yes.
And be more effective that way.
That's very good. Now, at this stage of the show, I just want to ask you, how would somebody reach you if they wanted to? We'll say it at the end too, but how would they reach you?
Oh, sure. Well, our website's the best way to do that. It's beacon.org. We have social media there. We have forums there, a couple of articles that'll just help with what's going on in the world of older people and caregiving and what are some of the solutions that we see being available. A couple of things that I've already mentioned, but beacon.org is the best place for that. And my email directly is available too. It's just director@beacon.org.
That's very good. I want to remind everybody out there too, you can listen to this program at WCGA 1100 AM. They have an app, so look it up. Please download it, make it part of what you do. And there's also an app called TNS, the Newscaster Studio, that you can get to also download this type of program. And again, I'd highly recommend that WCGA 1100 AM from St. Simons Island, Georgia, to download that so you can listen to some great Christian conservative talk shows and news and just real positive messages. I really love what Wesley and D. Cox have done there, and it's amazing. So again, going back to where we are, what should a group or a church think about maybe trying to fund this? I mean, what's it going to kind of cost to set this type of program? What have you felt like you've learned about that?
Well, we've structured it such that it's kind of in the vein of a working consultant for part-time, because the intention is to go be on site and connect with who does what in the church to get all these little pieces put together. So our contract fee is $25,000 for the 7 to 11 months, and we've extended it that long just to leave some space for emergency cancellations and that kind of thing. But the hope is that once we've got some of these pieces in place, we hire a director that's from the congregation, hired by the congregation, and then we get a moment to work alongside of each other so that they feel launched on stable feet. And then I take a step back, give them an opportunity to stay connected, do a smaller contract fee and that kind of thing for best practices and networking and continuing education and pursuit of other resources and directing people to them, because this isn't just, of course, for their church, it's for their community and discipleship right up until your last breath. That's how
Right.
we look
Absolutely.
at this.
Yes, yes.
So,
Well, and a lot of times I think a lot of people think the government needs to take care of this,
oh gosh.
right? And I'm telling you, it is amazing to me how many times I've seen people say, well, that homeless guy on the street, the government needs to take care of. And the church is not doing its job. I mean, as an individual, I don't do enough. I mean, I want to be a sender. I want to be supportive of ministries. And that's what I want to try to do. But there's a frontline person that needs help, right?
Mm-hmm.
I recently had a emergency call from a friend where his girlfriend was really in addiction and needed help. The easy thing to do is say, call this guy and try to get some help, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that particular friend, I did everything I could to help get that person. They needed to go rehab, right? The place called Gateway down here. And as you well know, you can intervene for an addict and you can get them in there. But if they decide they're done, they're done. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I felt led to help this person. Instead of just giving a number, I tried to put him to the right people to get it, make it happen. And, of course, he's a good friend. So I went the extra mile for him.
Right.
And I was so sad because in addiction, as you know, people just don't, they say they want help. They get help and they start realizing I need my drug or alcohol. And they want that worse than they want to be rehabbed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this particular person had to end up going to another state because of the Medicaid or whatever that was more beneficial to someone in addiction than Georgia that was up in the Midwest. And so, but we were getting the lady help, hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
And sometimes you just got to intervene directly. When you think about taking someone in this position and caring for them, what's the ratio? Like 1 person to 1, or what? How do you work that? How many people can one person help in a process like this in a church?
Well, the model is to have 2 to 1, usually a smaller number, but
So 2 patients for 1 person?
No, 2 volunteers per 1 patient.
Wow.
When you have a respite program,
Sure.
because it's
Sure.
someone that can be a buddy for the day.
Sure.
And usually it's a consistent person.
Yeah.
So someone with dementia gets comfortable with the one that they see and know. And then others that can kind of move about the cabin. So pass out, crafts or help move chairs or offer lunch, things like that. So when this respite ministry really launches in a place, the goal is to not only have seniors amongst the peers, but it's also to have youth, and it's to have a connection with anyone else. In fact, there is the same model is there on St. Simon's. I haven't looked up the name of, I can't remember the name of the church right offhand, but there is one there. And I have no doubt that it's full. The one we have in Chattanooga went from 2 days a week to 3 days a week because they're limited by space and volunteers to have about 14 participants who have dementia. And they have 60 volunteers that kind of spread across those 3 days a week. Some come once a week, some come all 3 days, some come once a month. It just depends on what they're available for. So it does make for a place of consistency so that you know that that person is safe. Now, my client that goes, we've always had a caregiver with her. There's only been 1 or 2 times that her son has taken her and has not stayed, just because she is older. She's a little bit more frail. She doesn't get around quite as as well. And so we've been a little bit white gloved with her,
Yes.
but pretty much everyone else comes in and they're recognized, and they are recognizing the folks that they've been seeing week after week after week. So there's kind of some long-term memory built up, and they enjoy it. It may have taken about 6 months for our client that has been going to remember, oh yeah, I did go. I enjoyed that. They're very nice people, so
Yes. Yes. That's
makes a big
great.
difference.
Well, what kind of training does that church volunteer need to have?
Well, that's something we're going to do too. It's just come with a heart to love on people, and we will help you navigate what it looks like to work with someone with dementia or cognitive decline, what it looks like to offer them an activity, but not to force it, to ask questions instead of make demands. It's just something everybody who's been a caregiver starts to learn. And I've told people before, I think moms are best at this
Yes.
because as their children get older, that you want to engage them and help in making those decisions and not
Yes.
demand, all the time. So I've seen that be a huge benefit, even in working. If you've worked with children, you do a little better at working with older adults that have cognitive decline, because there's just a gentleness that has to be incorporated in your mannerism, in your offer for help, or your redirection. And there's a lot of training now that's available on how to do that better, especially in a group setting.
Right. And I would assume there's a point when the church can't really, somebody gets so bad, I guess, from a memory standpoint, it's really hard for the church to continue to do that. Is that correct?
Well, it just depends. This is a social model, not a medical model. So as long
Gotcha.
as someone is able to feed themselves, walk to the bathroom, even if
Yes.
it's with the assistance of a
Sure.
caregiver, they're fine with that. The program lends itself to having regular email communication with the family member, just to say, this is how she's doing when she's here, or this is what we're noticing, or this is, just because they're good eyes in a 4-hour kind of controlled setting. It's actually really helpful to have someone outside the home see how someone is doing outside the home.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of an individual basis. I mean, because it's cognitive decline, it's all ages, really, and all kind of skill levels. So sometimes people will participate more in some activities and they'll participate less. Some people like the music, some people hate the exercise, just kind
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
but that's all part of it. The idea
Right.
is to give them the option of choosing the activity as opposed to being forced into it.
Gotcha. I understand. And then how about the director? Let's say the ideal director, what kind of background would they have?
Well, I would say the ideal director is someone who knows what it's like to coordinate volunteers. Loving and feeding of volunteers is extremely important, because that's kind of the way that this program becomes a ministry, and it's kind of mutual. You don't necessarily know walking into the room who's a participant and who's a volunteer, because the companion volunteers are as ministered to as the others. But because that director really sets the tone for communicating and recruiting and keeping up with and scheduling, it's a lot of task oriented juggling and communication. So somebody who's been a teacher, somebody who has been a manager of multiple things at one time makes for an easy prospect. An event planner, because you're doing a lot of event and activity and engaging with people.
All right. How would you recruit a church? I mean, in my view, one idea would be clearly trying to get an individual in the church that has that problem, or someone trying to help their parent or friend or whatever through the challenges of early dementia, going through dementia.
Mm-hmm.
What would be an idea of how to make it happen? Because again, a lot of times pastors are like, I'm too busy, I can't meet with you or whatever. And they don't necessarily have a senior ministry maybe, but how do you help recruit people to make it happen in a church basis? Because again, I agree, the church is where it needs to be at, not the government.
Yes. Well, having someone passionate is perfect. If you don't have a me to come help you implement, then a lot of these churches will develop ministries like this just with a notebook and maybe a video class.
Mm-hmm.
But typically what will happen is that a few people will kind of get the vision for let's have a ministry that really does actually love on some folks and be really practical about it, which is why I loved it, because doing caregiving myself, I was feeling like I'm the one with my thumb in the dike on some of these, for some of these families. And so when I approach a pastor, I let them know that part of why we formed to do this here is that we understand they've got a lot more on their plate than they can probably handle anyway. And we're not
Sure.
trying to add something to it. And so it's really on their lead. Who would you like me to talk with? For example, one of my pastors is now going to take this idea for respite development to his deacons meeting in April. So the deacons and have their tasks. They can make some decisions about budget. They can make some decisions about who would be point, who would I work with, helping pull all those pieces together. And that would be my point of contact for the weekly visit, just to keep that task list moving so that nothing falls off the side, so to speak. But there's usually a team. It is sometimes the elders and the deacons, because they're already kind of tasked in leadership roles to care for the widows that are looking for, someone who can do meals for someone who's now homebound, or the surgery that's happened in the hospital visitation, all that kind of thing. So that's kind of your natural bent already. But I try going straight for the senior pastor if I can get him, because I want him to know we understand the heart of pastorate, of discipleship, and reaching people in their community still, not just in their church, that all things considered may meet Jesus before the rest of us. And we want them to be meeting Jesus, not somewhere else, or
Absolutely.
being, standing before God and saying, I didn't do anything with the name of your son. But just having that heart to realize, they're coming close. They're the closest. And there are so many people around these churches, with 1,000 of them here in Chattanooga, out of 3,500 nonprofits in this town alone, that that there is a community of people who may not step foot in the church because of this, for the sermon on Sunday morning. But the need is so great when you become isolated and alone, taking care of an older parent, that just the offer of support will love people well, and they will walk into the building because you've offered something. One of the great things about the respite program is that built into the expectation is a nominal fee for the day, which comes out to about $12 an hour, which is ridiculous. You can't pay anybody $12 an hour. That's half of what it costs for a good caregiver. And that's only if you're getting her privately. Agencies are $30 an hour with a minimum of 4 hours a week just to keep that rate. And so being able to offer something like this with a very minimal cost, and then being able to recruit financial partners that will offset that cost for a family who can't afford it, means nobody gets turned away. And it helps to pay the director. It pays for arts and craft supplies, and helps to provide the meal and that kind of thing. So it's really a give and take. That doesn't place the whole burden on the church to provide, and it doesn't place the whole burden on the family to make it happen.
That's good. And when I think about that, I think about the challenges. What are some of the challenges that someone at home that's anticipating this need, what are they going to be facing?
Well, it's very different to go from an independent lifestyle to a 24/7 caregiver, where you've lost the ability to just pick up and go without having someone around. Oftentimes with dementia, especially since that tends to start younger, it's figuring out what is going on first. And then how much can you include your loved one in your regular life? When do you have to find someone to care for them? Then it's navigating managing caregivers after you've interviewed and hired them. How well do they get along with your loved one? I mean, that's part of the reason why I started working with my older client, is because she was not getting along with her caregiver. And her son heard me say I couldn't attend a Christmas party because I had a caregiving client. And he said, would you come meet my mom and just see if y'all get along? So the weight on a child to find and care now for a parent as though they are a child is a real flip. And it takes a lot of adjusting too. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing, especially when if you're an only child, or if you're an only child around. Um, if you're unmarried and it's just you taking care of mom, if you're a son, that presents even more complications, because oftentimes, even in the experience I have now, is son can do no wrong, but caregivers have a much harder time with,
Absolutely.
with navigating all of that. And so the ladies have to be a whole lot more patient than son does.
No question. Well, a lot of times it's clear that, the one that's caring for you is
Hmm.
going to get the brunt of a lot of that anger and
Yeah,
frustration of losing your ability to get certain things done.
true.
And I completely understand it. I remember when I was, in the process of deciding getting care from
Yeah,
like a Visiting Angels here or
sure.
Caden in Atlanta or whatever, because when I travel to Atlanta, I need to have someone that can help me with the
Hmm.
transfer and with
Hmm.
showers, putting compression socks on, and things like that.
Sure.
And you think, oh, we'll just get the person that's already there and let them come help me for 10 minutes, right? We'll give them extra $20 or something. But you just can't do that. It's pretty much one-on-one in my
Hmm.
situation. And I know that in the morning, for example, when I want to get up and go at 6 o'clock
Hmm.
in the morning, to get that person there for 4 hours, right? And then you get out your door and get your things done. And then you have somebody else that helps you maybe a little bit more and then a little bit helping at night. It's quite a process, and
Yeah.
it's hard to trust people.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just feel like you don't know what kind of box of chocolate you're going to get, right? Who's going
Yeah.
to show up at your door? And I mean the candy, right, or whatever, like the candy of
Yeah. You
you
never know
just
what you're
don't
going to
ever
get.
know, this person going to be good, or they're going to be
Hmm.
bad, or they're going to have a good attitude, they're going to have a bad attitude. And it really is nice when you can get someone consistent. You can say,
Hmm.
hey, I really like them, they're welcome to come back. And then someone else, again, their strengths and weaknesses like anybody.
Yeah.
And the challenge is, of course, once you find the star, usually the star is already taking care of somebody else full time, and you're getting the 4 hours with her and her helper, maybe even his, obviously. But
Hmm.
apparently, again, it's just one of those things you have to be willing to allow them to come and help you, because it
Hmm.
really does make a difference. I mean, it takes a lot of stress off when I know that I got someone coming that morning to help me
Hmm.
get ready for church. I mean, again, just socks on, compression
Hmm.
socks, just
Hmm.
getting basically ready so you can get out the door. And if they don't show up, it can be a real challenge. I mean, it's going to
Hmm.
take me twice as long to get ready. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm fortunate that I can afford that. And, we
Yeah.
have resources to make that happen. What are some resources people can go to help them financially to do this type of thing? The,
Sure.
the one that needs the care.
So, unfortunately, most of the Medicaid, Medicare doesn't cover in home care. That is a long term care insurance conversation needing to happen because
But isn't it cheaper for a lot of people to be at home?
much, much cheaper. Um, they all kind of all encompassing will cost 80 to 100 depending on the location. Also, the availability, the lines and lists of wait time are kind of crazy. Just knowing it here in Chattanooga, there's about 55 in home care agencies, but there are only two Medicaid nursing homes
Yes.
or assisted living, memory care facilities like that are private pay or insurance. And so people who have made I've had people who've had those conversations ahead of time and said, "All right, let's start this now while it's cheap and run this as long as it needs to run, whether it's a joint policy or it's individual policies for a married couple." That's going to be a huge benefit to whether it's a an illness or a short term thing. If something happened to me, same thing. If I had long term care insurance, which is I'm working on getting, then
Yes.
I would be able to have someone come and help me if I broke a hip, for example,
Gotcha.
walking on crutches, walking with a cast, need help in and out of a shower or a bath or what have you. Um, so that's one thing. When someone has dementia, the rules are a little bit different. If there's a diagnosis, oftentimes the caregiving and housekeeping is covered in insurance. So having another conversation with whoever your health insurance is with or your car, find out who they go to. I found mine just looking at the Ramsey,
Sure.
Ramsey folks, because I know
Dave
Ramsey
Ramsey.
folks.
Dave
Yeah,
Ramsey, you mean? Okay. Out of
Yeah.
Tennessee, Nashville. Okay.
Dave Ramsey has a network of people. I used to go to church with one of them. He's a financial planner. So I've now recommended a bunch of people to him. I've started talking with somebody out in California who's doing a lot of talks, and is a 30-minute call turned into an hour because he's just like, I'm so excited to talk to somebody who actually gets it, because I see how big the need is when people don't have it. And you can spend, I mean, for less than a 40-hour work week, you can spend nearly $80,000 a year just on caregivers. That's not on food or anything else that has to do with the care of your loved one. That's just paying a private caregiver. That's not paying a $30 minimum here in Chattanooga anyway. It just depends on where, the
So
location is.
you'd recommend that long-term care insurance?
I would recommend having a real hard look at what your finances are now, get some money in the bank. Just as an off the top of my head example, for me, being in my 40s, being healthy, about $137 gets me a $150,000 policy. $137 a month gets me a $150,000 policy with 1% compounding interest. That's a lot better than cleaning out more than I have my name on anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So,
All right, now, okay, when we go back to the cost of things like this, when I think about Medicare, Social Security, whatever, we paid into that.
yes.
So in theory, we should be able to get basically what we paid into it. So you're telling me that Medicare doesn't help with that at all? Is the state insurance like Medicaid?
Medicaid is nursing home eligible, which basically means when you are to the point of not being able to do like 3 of 5 ADLs, or what do I call that? ADLs, activities of daily living, is kind of how they gauge that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it really depends on your cognitive abilities, and it depends on your physical abilities. So if you cannot feed yourself, clothe yourself, go to the restroom on your own, walk, ambulate.
Right. Okay.
Multiples of those things have to be true at the same time.
Very good. Let's go some numbers. What percentage of people are going to have to face this reality? We have about another 5 minutes.
Okay.
Not many
people.
statistics. Just get them off your head would be fine.
Well, we've got about 4,000 people daily turning 65 for the next 11 years.
And it peaked last year.
Faster math.
It peaked last year.
Yes.
Right?
Last year was dubbed Peak 65, 2024, because the most baby boomers were turning 65.
That was my year. I was born in 59, turned 65 last year. So 1959 is the peak year of baby boomers.
Yes. That would be. So yes. 5 years from now, then the expectation is that that'll be another 300,000.
Correct.
And at the moment, the way housing is, and long-term care or memory care and things like that, the numbers kind of crack out to be about 20% of people who need it will have it. 80% of people who need it will be living at home or with a loved one and care in their home.
So 80% can still stay home most of the
time. Whether they can or not.
Gotcha.
There's not going to be an option for moving into a nursing facility where you're staffed 24/7.
Gotcha.
Families are going to have some pretty big adjustments, I think, to make, because we've just lived so split, so far away, or,
Right.
So that,
gotcha.
With that idea.
That's an amazing number. And of course, I've heard for many years that most people do stay in their own home, and most people do receive some kind of family care and get help there at the front line from family. But to your point, now that family needs some respite. They need some rest that the church could provide, and it'd be a great evangelical ministry. I mean, we can reach the gospel, get the gospel to them, and nobody needs it more than someone that's getting toward the end of their life, right? And the family that's trying to carry that burden, they need Jesus. Jesus is enough. He'll help them. And that's what we want to encourage people to do. It's a main thing, making disciples. I mean, teaching them, how to read the Bible and pray and to fast and to pray for other people, for sure, even around the world, not just here in America.
Yeah.
And I'm always amazed again how many people think they're going to end up in some type of nursing home, when again, most people do not. And it's not necessarily economic thing. It's literally because that's what they saw modeled in their family. The thing that I've really noticed, if someone takes care of their elder parent in their own home, most of the time that child will want to model that same type behavior. But if there's any problem and you've got enough money and you just put them in a retirement home or whatever, then that's going to be modeled to that next generation too.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of these retirement homes have a great ministry opportunity. You meet a lot of neat people. So there's a lot of positives to that too, especially if you're a man, because most men don't live as long as women. So you got it made as the longer you live.
That's right.
And again, that's a benefit for a man, but the reality of you got to be careful, right? So
Yes.
you hear all sorts of rumors, but I don't want to go there too much. But anyway, let me just say this to you. We have about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
What's a real quick, give us your address again, how to reach you.
Sure. It's beacon.org, BEKN.org, and my email address, director@beacon.org.
Very good. All right. Well, why don't you do me a favor? Why don't you say a quick prayer for us, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Thank you. Father, thank you, first of all, for your care for us and being the premier example of how you love and nurture and care for your kingdom, for your children. Lord, help us to reflect you in that way also. And Lord, I just want to ask specifically for the caregivers that hear this to know you are seen and heard and not forgotten, even when the isolating journey begins or as it ends. And Lord, just help us to be aware more of the needs people have that are unspoken. Help us to be noticing when someone is absent from a routine, and just to help come alongside, encourage, to be present, to step into a gap. Lord, give us eyes to see that and ears to hear it, and to love people like you do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. And I just want to thank you, Kristina, for doing this. And I'm amazed at what the ministry God's doing through you. And I'm also amazed that God is providing. There's find a need and fill it, right? And God is leading you to do this. And I think a lot of times, quote, older people and those retirement years and also the latter years, sometimes we forget that's a minority that a lot of people don't want to be a part of. They don't pay attention to it enough, yet it's their goal to eventually get there. And so a lot of younger people don't realize that someday you're going to be there. And so you're going to need to be patient and loving and helpful toward that generation as they get ready to promote. And of course, in your own right, it's going to happen in your family too. So get prepared. And I'm at that point too. I'm seeing my mom go through that, and I'm preparing myself for that. And I already know kind of some of the plan that I have in the back of my mind and how to do it. So, but again, you need to prepare. Be prepared, not scared. Just be prepared, because God's got great plans for you. There's going to be great ministry wherever you are if you're willing to do it. So, well, thank you again. And I want to thank everybody out there, Good Day friends, for joining us today for Speak the Truth in Love with Clint Day from St. Simons Island, Georgia on WCGA 1100 AM. Remember, every day is a God day.